In this section, we're going to discuss a little more about using HTML and CSS to lay out web pages. I've created a fairly simple design here. Let me go ahead and show it to you, and you can see how it looks in one of the web browsers. I'll use Firefox again. So this is the simple example layout, and that's exactly what I put as the header of the page. So this is made of 4 divs. The first div here is the header div, and you can see the code right here. And in there, I just have an H1 element that says this is a simple example layout, and I have some CSS code here that starts on line 19, which determines the look and feel of that. Now, I've decided to make it Arial, 1.4, bold, and centered for the text-align rule here. Now, I don't know if you've seen this before, but what I'm here saying is this is the header div and the H1 element inside it. So this is a descendant selector. That's what it's called. We use the header div and the H1 element. So here's the header div right here and the H1 element inside it. So that's how that gets styled. Then we have div 1 and div 2, which right now are stacked on top of each other in the page flow, followed by a footer, which just says copyright 2011, Mark Lassoff, learn-to-program.tv. And here is the CSS code for the footer paragraph tag. Set the font size to 0.65 ems, the font family to Georgia, and text align to center. So, of course, that gives us exactly what we saw before right here. I probably should change the title of this to page layout so it makes sense. Let me go ahead and do that. And now I think we've got everything we want. Now, this lays out fairly well, but let's say I wanted to put the div 2 and div 1 next to each other. So right now these are set to a width of 400. And I've got a footer and a header that don't have any particular width. So what would happen is the header and the footer are just going to be as wide as the page is. So if I expand the page like this, they're going to keep moving. So what I want to do is I'm going to create a container div. It's a really good idea when you lay out an entire page to create a container div. Now, I haven't created the div yet, but I already know I'm going to call it or ID it container, and the width is going to be 800 pixels. More commonly, and because we're limited space here on the video, you're going to set the fixed width of a page to about 960. That seems to be what's most common these days and is accommodated by most browsers, mobile devices, etc. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this whole thing and I'm going to enclose it in the container. And I'm going to close the container div down here at the very bottom. Something I recommend is that when you have nested divs like that, divs inside another, is as you end the divs, just put a little comment here as to what which div is being ended. So this way you're aware of, when you see all these end tags, you can't tell what they are attached to, what they're actually attached to. So this will be end footer. This would be the end of div 2. I'm not going to do all of them, but you'll get the idea. So this way we know, for example, that this particular closing div tag right here ends div 2. This one ends the footer. And you can see, by the way, the IDE, the text editor, gives you a little help here by highlighting. See, as I click that, the actual opening div is available to you, or it kind of flashes there in orange. So that'll make it just a little bit easier. All right. So now we've got our container. We've set the width to 800. Now that's going to affect the look of the page, because it's now based on 800. And as I expand it, the header and footer don't move. So we've got that down. Now I could set a background for the page itself if I wanted to. So we could set the container. Let's set just a very, very light background color so we can see it. Background color. Again, I'm going to go with a very light gray. Let's go with DD. I think that'll be light enough. If not, I can lighten it up a little bit. Oh, I think that's fine. Now, often if I'm laying out an entire page, I'm also going to want to zero out these margins here. So if you remember, we do that in the body tag. So I'm going to go to the body tag, use that as a selector, and I'm simply going to set the margins to 0 pixels all the way around. Once I've done that, it's going to have a much better look. All right, so we're getting some other space up here that's from another element. Notice we still have the space up here, And that's probably coming from a different element. So let's take a look and see if we have any margins on other elements. Now, if we don't see it, what we can do is this. We can go into Firefox, and I recommend that you get a tool known as Firebug. On the Mac, the little element for Firebug is right down here. Now, that'll let us see where different space is coming from. So I can, for example, point here in the body at the div container, and it's going to show me where that container div is. I can do the div the header, and it'll show me where the header div is, or where div 1 is. We can point at the body tag. We can see where that is. So I can see here we have all this space, but I'm still not sure, based on this, where that particular extra space up at the top is coming from. So we can also look at the computed CSS. So if I click, for example, here on the container div, this is showing the computed CSS for the container div. It's showing me a line height of 19.2. It's showing me a font size of 16 pixels there, font weight of 400. So it's showing me all of the selections for this part of the layout. I also can go here to the layout, and I can click on the margin, the padding, the border, etc. for the container. So I can see what each of these values is. So I'm seeing 0 margin, 0 border, 0 padding. I can go here to the header. We can click on the header element here. Oops, let's open that back up. So now we're on the header element, and I see the header is 800 by 27, padding 0, margin, etc. So I'm not seeing anything here which is indicating where that element is until I click on this H1. And notice this H1 here has 15 pixels of margin on the top and 15 pixels of margin on the bottom. So what I can do is I can go into the CSS, zero out those margins on the H1 tag. That'll probably do the trick. So that's how we use Firebug to kind of find problems with the layout. It's an important skill. So we're going to go to the H1 here in the header, and I'm going to just set the margin top to 0 pixels. Once I do that, and I refresh and bring my browser up, it eliminates that margin space that we were looking for. So that's perfect. That's exactly what we wanted. So we've hunted down the problem with our layout using Firebug, and we were able to solve that problem. Great. Now, oftentimes, I'm going to want to center this container div on the page. So let me show you how to do that. We're going to go here to the container, and I'm going to set the margin to 0 and then auto. Once I do that, that actually will center the div on the page. So now that 800 pixel div is centered on the page, and as I change the page width, that div remains centered. Now, we can also set a height to the div so it goes all the way down. So let's set our container to a height of, oh, I don't know, for this, let's set it just to 800 pixels. That may not make sense for your daily work, but kind of makes sense for what we're doing here. Let's take a look. And now the div goes all the way down. All right, so we've got our div set up. So what I want to do is I want to put these two divs next to each other. So the way I do this is, let me actually add a little more content first. So I'm going to put this in paragraphs like this. I just use this Latin placeholder text, which comes from a site called lipsum.com, Lipsum.com. Makes your life just a little bit easier. All right, so we've got this here. So what I'm going to do is I'll just copy that again. So we add a lot of content into div 1, and we'll add a lot of content into div 2. Now that we've kind of got our placeholder text in there, let's do 1, 2 more. All right. So now we're going to have a lot more placeholder text, right? So this is going to expand the width of our page. Now, since we only made the height 800, that doesn't work too well. So I'm going to take that height rule out again. So we have the height right here. I could have used an overflow there, but I think we're better off doing it like this. All right, so now it all fits within the div. Perfect. So what I'm going to do is I want to put those next to each other. So I'm going to take div 2, and I'm going to have it float to the left of div 1. So I'm going to go ahead here and set up div 2. And I'm going to set up the rule float left. I'm going to save that, and let's take a look at it in the browser. And I'm still getting them one on top of each other, but notice now it's not quite working down at the bottom. So we know something is wrong. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the width of these down a little bit. I'm going to take the width out of here because we need to accommodate the width of both of these. I'm going to set the width of div 2 to 395 pixels and the width of div 1 to 395 pixels. So that gives a 10 pixel fudge factor, so they fit in there in the 800 pixel width container. All right, so let's go ahead and refresh. And one thing I forgot to do here is to take div 1, and I'm going to float that on the right. Okay, so here we go. And there we go. So now we have our two columns. But notice when we did that, our copyright here, our footer div, now doesn't work too well. Let's see where the footer div actually is. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the footer div, I'm going to set the background color to black and the text to white. Oops, not text, but color to white. Just like that. All right, here we go. Refresh. So notice here, that's obviously not what we want, and that's just for the footer. So something obviously is wrong. And what I need to do is actually take the footer div, and I need to clear it. So watch this. I'm going to take the footer div, and I'll put my colors back in there, and I'm going to set clear to both. Because what happens is when I floated these to the left and right, when I floated div 1 and div 2 to the left and right, the problem is that we took the actual kind of normal layout away, and now the float didn't know where to go down, the footer didn't know quite where to go here at the bottom. So if I clear it, I'm telling it to clear the divs to the left and right, and it finds its place down there at the bottom. So all I'm going to add here is just within div 1, a quick H2, this is the main headline, and we'll add here in div 2 just another one, H2, this is the secondary headline. So as you can see, using float and clear, we can create much more complex layouts for our pages. Now, of course, I probably would add padding and some margins to make this look better, but this gives you the basics of laying out a complex page using HTML and CSS.